So this week we are talking again about logistics outsourcing, and in fact this week and next week I want to give you some tips from the customer perspective and the 3PL perspective. So this week let's get into the customer's perspective, coming right up. Okay, so we're talking about logistics outsourcing again. Why? It's kind of the flavour at the moment. Here at Logistics Bureau, we're seeing lots and lots of activity. People wanting to go to the market for the first time, people wanting to assess whether they're getting good service or not. All sorts of RFP and RFT activity underway. So if you missed the video last week, do go back and have a look at that, because I shared last week a suggested contents for a service specification, which is a really important part of that whole outsourcing process. But this week, I want to talk about some tips and insights, if you like, from the customer's perspective if you're going through logistics outsourcing. Now, I've got 8 things to consider. I don't want to make this a really lengthy video. I'm going to talk about 3 of them, and then I'll show you where you can download some more information and look at the others. So this week we're talking about the customer perspective. And why are we doing that? Well, I still see lots of outsourcing relationships going wrong, which is really sad. It does require a fairly rigorous process from both sides, the customer and the 3PL, to get things right, and hopefully these tips will help you get it right. So, what are the 3 I'm going to be mentioning this week? First of all, establish your clear outsourcing objectives, and I've talked about this on the channel before. What do I mean by that? What are you trying to achieve with outsourcing your logistics? So one common one, for example, might be we're trying to reduce our costs. That can happen. I'm not sure it's a realistic objective necessarily. Why do I say that? Well, if you think about it, you might be running, let's say, your own warehouse operation. For whatever reason, you want to outsource that to a 3PL. Why do you think they're going to do it a lot cheaper than you are? It's rare, to be honest, that happens. It can happen if you're particularly bad at doing it, if you're particularly inefficient, if the 3PL has a lot of expertise and capability and technology that really matches your industry and your sort of business, they can probably do it more cost effectively. So think about the objectives. Is it about reducing cost? More often it's about improving service levels. Maybe, logistics isn't a core sort of skill set within your business. Maybe you would rather focus on other things. So you want a professional 3PL company coming in to help you lift that service. Another common objective is flexibility. So particularly if your business is growing, if you're growing new channels, maybe if you're shrinking, so that volume of activity and the service levels might be varying. Sometimes it's better to actually have an outsourced relationship, which gives you flexibility and resources and costs. Very often you might want sort of access to particular processes and technologies which are far easier to access maybe through a 3PL relationship. So the first one, really important one, think about why you're outsourcing. What is it that you actually want to achieve? And make sure you get that common understanding across the business. The next one I want to mention is approach appropriate 3PLs. I've seen over the years a whole variety of approaches by businesses, where they'll do a public tender, which sometimes you have to do if you're a government organisation, particularly if you're a big public listed company, perhaps. I tend not to favour that because you're putting a lot of organisations, a lot of potential suppliers through the mill to, prepare bids, and depending how many you're approaching, they could have quite a low opportunity for success, probability of success. So it's putting a lot of people through a lot of effort. It also worries me a little bit that, you can come across as a fairly uninformed buyer. So I would always err on a smaller sort of target market of 3PLs. You should know who the ones are in your industry that really match your requirements. If you don't, get some support through that process. But you really don't want to be taking that shotgun approach and really just approaching every possible 3PL that could undertake your work. So that sort of begs the question, how many should you approach? Make sure they're appropriate firstly, and that they have experience in your industry and your types of products and all that kind of stuff. Generally then, I would work backwards and say, once you've gone through the process, it's good to, you don't want a one-horse race. You don't want to have gone through your outsourcing process, your evaluation, selection and so on, and you're left with one choice. You certainly want 2 or 3 at the end of it, so that you actually have a choice. So work back from that in terms of what you think the dropout rate might be and so on. But it's not going to be dozens. It's going to be a handful that you're going to whittle down to 2 or 3 that you're really comfortable with. So appropriate 3PL is very important. Another thing, and we'll sort of jump towards more the end of the process, something that people get dramatically wrong quite frequently, is the implementation planning. They put quite a bit of effort into the whole RFP, RFT process, the evaluation, the selection, they're doing all the reference checking, and they're very comfortable with who they picked. And I kind of think that's the end of the process. Well, really, that's just the start, because you then have to go through the planning process and the implementation process. So through that evaluation phase, when you're still trying to decide who you're going to partner with for your 3PL, I would suggest you start talking, implementation planning. You want to be talking to the people from the 3PL who are going to be managing the relationship, who are going to be helping with the implementation, because that is a critical part of the whole success of the thing. I've seen far too many times where, a customer has made the decision to go with a certain 3PL and then it goes off the rails during implementation. Different people appear on the scene. There's been no sort of relationship built up there. There's been poor planning. So that's really where things can go off the rails. So that would be my 3rd tip of the 8. Make sure that you do joint implementation planning, very detailed. Get some of that done through the RFP process so that you're very comfortable with their capabilities and their people. And then, of course, as soon as you're going into that selection process, very detailed planning. So there's 3. What would be other tips that you would have for outsourcing success from a customer perspective? And then next week we'll talk about it from the 3PL perspective, which is just as important. Now, I mentioned that there are 8 tips that I wanted to share with you. We'll put a link up here. If you jump over onto that link, you can actually download a little guide, a bit of a checklist if you like, of the 8 things that you should consider from the customer perspective. There's also the 8 from the 3PL perspective, but I'll be talking about that in next week's video. So just jump on that link, and I'll also put the link in the description down below the video. Thanks for watching. Hope you have some great logistics outsourcing relationships. I've seen some great ones over the years. You get it right. I often say it's a bit like a marriage. You've got to pick your partner really carefully, and if you do that, and it's a good relationship, there's no reason why it shouldn't last, forever. Forever? Well, I'm trying to sort of hint there that marriages should last forever. But there's no reason why an outsourcing relationship shouldn't last for decades. So all success with your logistics outsourcing. Bye for now, and I'll see you next week.